panelists to introduce themselves, because again, people have different identities to the work they do. We tend to focus on the job, but then I'd like them to introduce themselves, and I'll start with Fadel.
Viva Africa, viva. Viva Africa, viva. Mon nom est Fadel Barro. Je suis un activiste. Mais je ne sais pas si je dois me présenter en tant qu'activiste simplement, parce que depuis un temps, je suis un activiste à la conquête du pouvoir. J'ai co-créé le mouvement Y en a marre et la plateforme Afrikki. Et aujourd'hui, je travaille sur la paix. Comment construire une paix durable à partir des humanités africaines, de l'afro-humanisme.
Okay, Phumi.
Nice. My name is Phumi Mtetwa. I am a movement activist rooted in the 1986 struggles in South Africa. I have worked across the continent and globally on various issues, including sexual and reproductive rights, the freedoms of feminists and LGBTIQ people. I now serve as the regional director of Just Associates, leading and contributing our work across the African continent on feminist movement building and strengthening.
Thanks. My name is Gyekye Tanoh. People call me Barzini. My first identity is that I'm technologically incompetent, as we just saw. As we just saw, so bear with me. That's not my only claim to being a dinosaur. I'm also a dinosaur in one sense that Briggs referred to, in terms of the classical labor movement and what their understanding of their role is. I think that gives us a platform to proceed in terms of how we understand the new configurations of society, of where power is looking, of where it emanates from, and so on. And it's in that sense that my experience and my history, I think, is something that I'm very happy and very pleased here to contribute to learn from, to help enrich, and above all, to organize better and more effectively for all of us, by all of us, and to all of us in terms of the kind of new world that we want to create. Thank you very much.
Okay, so I'll start with you, Fadel. As a founder of Y en a marre, and having seen how the youth movement in Senegal spurred the current political status, the current status of politics in Senegal, what are your thoughts around building on that? Because before, this is not the first time, you've pushed against the current regime staying on, but further on have pushed against the Macky Sall recently. And so you've seen the opposition leading, now taking over government. How are you building on those struggles to generate an interest amongst everyday citizens so that you can expand and broaden the solidarity and the work just as people are working just beyond the politics? So people are now in power, and of course some of your own comrades are maybe aligned in certain political spaces. What is some of the efforts you're thinking about to really broaden this movement and deepen it so that you're bringing in the everyday citizens along?
Je pense que le Sénégal n'est pas une entité viable. Le Sénégal est un petit pays, est une création coloniale à l'image de tous nos pays. Et dès qu'on commence à se battre, que ce soit au Sénégal, comme en Guinée, ou dans n'importe quel pays africain, Je pense que ce que je dis là, tout activiste peut le témoigner, peut le certifier. Dès que vous commencez à vous battre pour l'amélioration des conditions de vie des gens dans votre territoire, et aussi pour les libertés, mais aussi surtout pour la démocratie et la bonne gouvernance, vous vous rendez compte que votre pays est un minime, est une toute petite chose qui n'est pas viable. Vous pouvez faire tout ce que vous voulez, vous pouvez faire les changements que vous voulez, mais on est dans un grand ensemble. C'est comme s'il y a un mouvement qui vous pousse inéluctablement vers les abîmes. Et nous, on essaie d'améliorer, on se bat, mais on se rend compte que ça ne bouge pas vraiment. De mon expérience de Y'en a marre à maintenant, mais aussi en Afrique de l'Ouest, qu'est-ce qu'on a remarqué? C'est que 10 ans ou 15 ans en arrière, après la Tunisie, tout le monde a vu en Afrique subsaharienne, les jeunes se sont organisés, ils se sont fait appeler à travers les mouvements citoyens. Il y a eu beaucoup de présidents qui ont été changés. Il y a eu de nouveaux régimes qui sont arrivés. Mais on se rend compte que ça ne sert pas. On change les têtes, on change les présidents, mais on ne change pas les comportements, on ne change pas les pratiques. Rien ne bouge en fait. On peut remplacer Abdoulaye Wade par Macky Sall par Diomaye et Sonko, mais la pratique politique ne change pas, ne bouge pas. Au Sénégal, on est encore chanceux. Mais si vous allez dans d'autres pays comme le Burkina Faso, je parle sous le contrôle de mes amis qui sont là, on a changé Blaise Compaoré pour tomber dans des cycles de politiciens de plus en plus violents jusqu'à ce que les militaires prennent le pouvoir. Si vous allez au Mali, c'est pareil. Si vous allez en Guinée, partout dans nos pays, à chaque fois que les jeunes se battent et arrivent à changer de régime, on se rend compte qu'il y a un autre ordre qui arrive et qui est beaucoup plus violent que l'ordre que nous avons combattu par le passé. Alors, devant ce constat, qu'est-ce qu'on fait? Moi, je me suis rendu compte que, parce que tous les politiques que nous avons, les fondements de la politique en Afrique ne sont pas des fondements qui viennent de chez nous, ne viennent pas de nous-mêmes. Toutes les idéologies politiques que nous portons, ce sont des idéologies politiques que nous importons d'ailleurs. Nous manquons gravement de fondements théoriques de comment faire la politique en Afrique. Ça, c'est un premier point. Le deuxième grand problème, c'est on est cloisonné. On est mis dans des... Dès que des jeunes commencent à bouger, à avoir une vision pour leur propre pays, on nous cloisonne. Les gens sont enfermés. On t'appelle activiste, tu ne peux plus bouger de là. On t'appelle société civile, tu ne peux plus bouger de là. Et au bout du compte, on est plusieurs personnes dans un espace qui veulent le changement, mais on n'est pas efficace. C'est comme, j'ai l'habitude de donner cette image, c'est l'image de tous les Africains qui veulent leur épanouissement, mais à cause des frontières, on n'arrive à rien faire ensemble. C'est la même chose dans nos propres pays. Dans les dynamiques de nos pays, on est tellement séparés, chacun dans son domaine. Lui, il est dans les droits de l'homme, lui, dans les féministes, lui, il est dans ça. On est tellement dispersés que nous n'avons pas un agenda commun où on peut avoir une trajectoire, on peut avoir une vision dans ce que nous faisons. C'est pour cela que nous, on a démarré depuis quelques années à essayer de regarder dans les imaginaires africains, ça veut dire que dans l'afro-humanisme, ce que j'appelle l'afro-humanisme, depuis le Marre en Égypte, qu'est-ce qui de Ubuntu en Afrique de l'Est, le Djam dans l'Afrique de l'Ouest, là où on est, dans tous les pays africains, vous avez des pratiques très fortes que nous n'avons pas, que nous essayons en tout cas à notre niveau, que nous essayons de faire une trajectoire pour pousser les jeunes à aller vers un avenir meilleur. Je dis pêle-mêle tout ça juste pour dire que nous pensons qu'en ce moment, il nous faut résolument aller vers autre chose, mais pour aller vers cette autre chose-là, il faut oser inventer de nouvelles choses. Et cet effort d'invention, cet effort de nouveauté manque clairement.
Thank you. Kim, I'll come to you. When I'll ask you the question, you'll also introduce yourself. But to Phumi, just building on his previous aspect around it, it seems that the fight for reform, you sort of go in a little bit forward and then you move back. So within the feminist movement, you're looking at it so there's a lot of gains that were made. And then in the last few months, there's a lot of everyone is complaining about there's a lot of losses. But at the same time, you're not only dealing with that, but you're also dealing with the internal struggles of class, grassroots feminists versus the struggle to just bread and butter, to feed yourselves. And also within that, because you're at a space where it's the feminist movement, environmental struggles, political struggles. How are you looking at this, and what are some of the thinkings that you'd have to deal with this reform agenda versus the revolution aspect, at the same time dealing with just various, aspects between class, identity, but just the struggle to survive?
Thank you so much, my sister, for that question. Good morning, Paraza. Good morning, comrades. Comrades, many of you hear me speaking a lot, but today I want to particularly answer that question, thinking about comrades that are not necessarily journeying with the feminists in this instance. The first thing in thinking about your question is thinking about the left across the continent. I wish I could say the left has matured in the continent in relation to your question and in relation to the issues that feminists have brought to the table. But I also wish to say that the feminist movement has also been distant in relation to the left across the continent and the world. And there are many questions for us to answer in relation to how were feminists not feeling welcome in the left, and how was the left moving in patriarchal ways that were alienating the feminists? That's the first point I want to raise. The second point I wish to raise is that we have learned, and Briggs put it nicely, about the collapse of the US empire. And for us who have engaged for so many years in reformist agenda, the manner in which power has configured is showing us that all of the laws, and for many of you who know my work in South Africa, celebrating our constitution and what, has not emancipated black people, poor people, women, LGBTI people. And yet we can boast that we have good laws and good constitution, right? It shows us that only engaging in a reformist agenda, as Brick said, like borrowed from Roman Dutch law and everything cooked post-World War II, is not an emancipatory agenda for all of us who are organizing across the continent. So whilst we know that we have to defend those wins, we know that those wins will not respond to the bread and butter issues, will not respond to why I am unsafe still in a country that recognizes me for all my identities. It will not respond to why many migrants and refugees are so much killed and attacked in what Hadi calls the province in Africa, which is South Africa. That's the second thing. The third thing, I love hearing us always raise the issues of Ubuntu, we must build together and all of that. Comrades, in the last 10 years in this continent, we have never seen more laws promulgated against women's bodies, against lesbians, gays, and bisexual and transgender people, against sex workers, against everybody basically who is othered. Where's the left in that? Because that agenda that uses law and politics, we see it a lot during campaigns, right? We see it a lot in relation to culture and tradition that says, I am not African enough and therefore I am not that. Where is the left, and where are progressive thinkers and comrades with us in that struggle? The last thing I will say about this is that when we think about the power of movements, we have to contend with the fact that not only have we been weakened as like a deliberate reason of weakening movements, but it is that movements, as we know them to be vehicles for change, have been deliberately weakened. We have never been, and we are not weak because of funding, comrades. We are not weak because of funding. These are deliberate intentions by capitalist neoliberal thing to weaken our ability to organize and to bring about change. Never have movements been so fragile. So in this moment of thinking about what is the power of movement, what is the bigger we that is necessary for Africa and the world right now, we have to answer all of those questions and many more questions, I'm sure, are sitting in the room to think about how we are going to build that bigger we. And this is what feminist ideals, feminist proposals, and feminist contributions are located in the broader thing. It's a vision of society. It's nothing to scare the left about. Thank you.
Kim, I'd like to come to you, but first if you could spend some time to just introduce yourself to the...
I was born by the river in a little tent, and oh, just like that river I've been running ever since. It's been a long time coming, but I know a change is gonna come. Oh, yes, it is. It's been too hard living, but I'm afraid to die. I don't know what's up there beyond the skies. It's been a long time coming, but I know a change is gonna come. Oh, yes, it is. And I start with a song not because I'm an artist, but it's essential that we begin to imagine how to decolonize the pedagogy of how we convene. Because I sit up here on this high platform, and you all sit down there below me, and we learn that inherently, right? Now, make no mistake about it, our people taught the world how to be royal. But what does that really mean now in the context of who we are as a people now? And so I start with music to bring the vibration into this room to remind you that we are connected, even on a level beyond this language that is my enemy, right? Je suis désolé. Because I don't have any other way to connect that with you, right? But vibration is a language that reminds us of who we are outside of these colonial languages that force us to communicate this way. As we develop systems and approaches to amplifying indigenous and African languages, right? She asked me who I was, so I'll keep it brief. I'm an artist. I'm the executive director of the Teaching Artists Institute. We use art as a tool for social transformation in 9 countries around the world, 7 of which are on the continent of Africa. Of course, I am born in the divided states of America. It is what it is. Now the world can see the cracks in what has been the illusion, because my people have never been disillusioned by what we've lived through. And the social movements that we are speaking and holding up today, empowering today, has been the lifeline. We would not exist without jazz and hip hop and the Negro spirituals that maintained our sanity in that land. And so I'm here today to explore ways that the role of artists and culture workers and artivists can be a part of social movements in the only way, in my opinion, that's ever worked, because we are the rhythm people. And once we begin to center our own culture in this conversation, our own pedagogy, we'll realize that we have made it and will continue post the Berlin Conference, post 1492 when Columbus sailed the ocean blue and the Roman Catholic Church said God wills it, these invasions of our lands. Post all of these things we've had to continually overcome. The artists have reminded us that we have made it and will continue to make it. We are abundant. allies, especially in this era that makes really clear who our oppressors are and their stick-to-itiveness. At the same time, as the mother of civilization, the African woman, our job has always been the balancing act. Our first mother, Mother Earth, Mother Nature, the reason that we manage the world's resources is because we understand our interconnectedness. We are nature. Our bodies are literally made of the minerals of the soil. There is no separation. This is only in our mind, and our people always understood and knew this. And so in this year of reparatory justice, as we begin to raise up the African mother of civilization, as she understands that we're not feminists, we're not angry at our men, we understand that they are our partners, they are our sons, they are our brothers. We need them too. This is a part of the balance, right? That we have to realign in the world, because white women have some real issues with their husbands, and they should, right? We understand. We're not a part of that conversation. Our energy during this year of reparatory justice has to be laser focused on reestablishing balance, because this reparations, this reparatory justice about remaking a new world, and when we all realize that reparations is everybody's job, even our counterparts in the, those in the socialist movement, you know, those against this capitalistic thoughts that came out of the Industrial Revolution, this inherent sense of scarcity that we find with people that were born in regions without enough resources, right? Because the land didn't provide them with anything. But we don't have those inherent sense, that inherent sense of scarcity. And so our job is to empower them to support our reparatory justice movement. Let them know that they are very much included in our plight to rebalance the world, because that's what reparations ultimately is, our balance with Mother Nature.
Thank you. Barzini, you mentioned that you come from work around trade, labor, working peoples. I just wanted, listening to the other three panelists, what could you say the social movements, what are the struggles the social movements are confronted by now, and how are we positioned to engage with them?
Yeah, thank you very much. And thanks to my colleagues on the panel, and you for your very good and penetrating questions. I think that in trying to answer where we are and what's in terms of our points of departure as we speak, going forward, I think it's as good a place to start from is to ruthlessly and shamelessly appropriate Briggs. Because Briggs talked about this double movement in terms of the external and the internal, and I want to, appropriate that and nudge it along a little bit. First of all, here in Africa today, yes, we can talk about all the different crises that we face and how they interrelate. We can talk about debt. We can talk about the fact that it is the only continent where the sheer numbers of absolutely poor people is growing. It's the only continent. So that, for example, in 2018, Nigeria overtook India as the country with the greatest number of poor people anywhere on earth. Now, India is what, 5-6 times Nigeria's population? And yet, Nigeria has overtaken. And that's a concentration which reflects something that is more broadly the reality across Africa. All this is happening in the 21st century when all of us daily were fed a diet of media headlines, of academic analysis, of all kinds of policy prescriptions whose starting point was that Africa is rising because for a decade and a half or more, the continent has seen an unprecedented concentrated period of far-reaching economic growth. That is undeniable. You couldn't open a newspaper without it saying on a daily basis, 8 out of the 10 fastest growing economies are in Africa, this, that, and the other. And again, that is true, okay? So if that is the case, and it is the same period that we have seen the birth of, of so many African millionaires, so that Accra, this wretched city here in Accra, for example, from 2006 onwards, was one of the places with the fastest growth rate of high net individuals, which means multimillionaires, on the planet, which is the case for many, many African countries. It is the period when we have seen your Dangotes, billionaires, and so on and so forth proliferate in South Africa, in Egypt, in Nigeria, in Kenya, God knows where. So if that is the case, then I think that, 60 odd years after Kwame Nkrumah wrote, neocolonialism as the highest stage of imperialism, is neocolonialism to be understood simply as foreign imposition, or as my brother Fadel put it, is it simply that we are embracing policies that are imposed from abroad, or that there is a constituency here which is not betraying anybody, but serving its own interests by pursuing and finding ways in which the order that we live in globally, the order that Briggs characterized so very well, is an order that serves them in their own exploitation and their own oppression of their own people here, whilst finding ways to renegotiate how best they can share and coexist with the bigger partners, those who have the Americas and so on and so forth. So my point is that if we're looking at the internal and the external, it is important that we kind of rethink the rigidity with which we hold onto this conception that we are victims of internal imposition alone. External imposition alone. I think that there are active ingredients, active dynamics, active interests here, which we need to consider in our fight, and that our fight requires that integration of the external and the internal. In so saying, let me land on 2 points. In so saying, I think that the first thing is, yeah, there's hostility from mystical sources. In so saying, I think that we have to think about these things in terms of relationships. When we say rich and poor, these are not parallel worlds which simply happen to be running at the same time on different tracks. They are intimately related. So if you mention the 1% in Africa and globally, you have to ask, what is the mechanism by which, on an active and on ongoing basis, they manage to concentrate and centralize wealth in their hands, for which reason they abort, distort, corrupt democracy, in fact, prevent it from really taking root, for which reason they seek to divide us on the basis of ethnicity, on the basis of gender, on the basis of sexuality, on the basis of nationhood and all that kind of thing. And in this era, given these considerations, is nationalism alone, Pan-African nationalist alone, an adequate response to this kind of crisis? I think we have to be bold enough to kind of rethink some of these elements. Because everybody and anybody who produces value, surplus value, over and above what they claim for themselves, and that surplus value is claimed by others, their own ruling class, their immediate boss, their landlord, their bankers, home and abroad, everybody on that side potentially has an interest in rebalancing, the rebalancing that our sister here was talking about. That agenda also gives us a day-to-day focus. If people are fighting for jobs, if people are fighting against the kind of monopoly of the food sector that brings about food price inflation, if people are fighting to claim territorial autonomy from the encroachment of extractive industries of all types and so on and so forth. Yeah, these are the struggles that I think we ought to embrace on a day-to-day basis. Now, this is no secret, because that's precisely those kind of movements from which we are coming from. But my point then is this. If we continue to, and here is a slightly potentially unpopular point that I want to make. I don't think then that given the fact that we have this wholesale systemic onslaught on our existence, as it were, and this wholesale way in which division, creating hierarchies among us, our own selves, among the majority, hierarchies are constantly being recreated. The comrade sister just talked about that the threat that we face is the threat of fragmentation, for which reason one ought to really consider that is the way forward strengthening of our specific social movements as such, as a priority. Of course, we have to do that, but I'm saying as a strategic priority. Or is it generalizing the resistance against our exploiters, our oppressors at home and abroad, and doing so with the idea that the agenda of radical equality among our own selves is necessary to transform ourselves, transform our capacity to respond, to confront the question of fragmentation, to build a unifying collective social agent that is able to bring about this kind of transformation. So in landing here, I want to stress that the first thing is for us to understand that the question of class, I think, remains central. And no one can talk about LGBT people where the majority are not affected on the basis of class lines. In Ghana, for example, the just expired so-called family values bill. Family values in a place where most people can't feed their own children. I wonder what family values they're really talking about. But in the same family values bill, if me, as a middle-class person, it's not my fault, I was born in a middle-class family. If me, as a middle-class person, living in my bungalow with my own private compound, whatever my sexuality is, who is going to be a vigilante on me? Even those who may be my gardener or my security, dare they say anything when their job's on the line? But if you live in these collective housing estates, and these what we're calling Accra and the rest of Ghana, compound houses, if you live in huts without doors and windows, you are the one who's vulnerable. In all these low-income, high-density, you are the one who's vulnerable for all the vigilantism and so on and so forth. In other words, the direct issue here is the division of people. At the same time, that division of people is taking on the kind of vigilantism, the kind of land guardism, the kind of subterranean militarization of society that is taking place and so on and so forth. So these are questions for us to confront, not simply as ethical and moral questions. Briggs put it very well. They're existential questions. But that existential questions requires us to find what is the source of this, the united source of these attacks on us. And I am saying that is the system of value extraction. And that is the system of capitalism. And therefore, our response has to be one that finds ways to integrate everybody in their fight to claw back the resources that we ourselves create, the resources that are based on our existence, and in so doing, be doubly conscious of the ideological, cultural, other divisions that are taking place and be able to confront those kind of unities. And to do so, we must externalize and extend resistance, not simply seek alone to build our own social movements where we come from. Thank you.
Thank you, Barzini. It looks, the mystical was trying to stop you. But to build on that, I'd like the panelists to each, having reflected on others' points, but also reflecting on our own struggles, our own contribution to the movement, what would be your thinking around what could be done, where we are in moving, in sort of building the power of movements?
Merci. En fait, je pense que le problème que nous avons en Afrique, c'est que, c'est pas qu'en Afrique, c'est le problème que nous constituons nous-mêmes, parce que je pense que nous constituons un problème finalement. Nous constituons un problème parce que nous ne sommes pas une voie. Nous ne sommes pas une solution pour l'instant. Nous contribuons à réfléchir, nous contribuons à... C'est comme si on se bat les yeux fermés. On n'arrive pas à se regarder pour se connecter, savoir où est-ce qu'on tape, qui tape quand, qui va faire quoi, à quel moment. C'est pour ça que je dis que finalement, nous constituons un problème en tant que mouvement citoyen, en tant qu'activiste, en tant que militant, au lieu parce que le problème qui nous maintient dans la dépendance et dans le non-épanouissement est un problème global. Parce que si vous regardez ses origines, depuis l'impérialisme, la colonisation, les chefs d'État que nous avons, les idéologies culturelles qui sont importées d'ailleurs et qui nous maintiennent en Afrique dans la dépendance, c'est des systèmes assez organisés qui agit de manière régulière avec des instances qui sont connues, etc., etc. Mais nous, la réponse que nous apportons, nous ne l'apportons pas de manière harmonisée. C'est pour ça d'ailleurs que je dis qu'en Afrique, les mouvements citoyens en ce moment ne sont pas une voie. C'est très pluriel. Le fait qu'on soit pluriel, c'est bien, mais nous n'arrivons pas à être une force. C'est pour ça, qu'est-ce qui est à l'origine de cela? Ce qui est à l'origine de cela, c'est que nous n'arrivons pas à nous parler nous-mêmes de manière sincère, faire discuter nos agendas. On n'a pas d'agenda en Afrique. Comment? Dernièrement, la dernière question qui est posée, c'est la réparation. Aujourd'hui, tout le monde parle de réparation. Chacun va y aller. D'ailleurs, mes craintes, je les vois maintenant. La réparation est aujourd'hui utilisée dans le même face-à-face stérile avec l'Occident. Quand on parle de réparation, c'est toujours l'autre, le problème, qui doit venir nous réparer. Et je pense que sur ce point-là, on avait une belle opportunité, ne serait-ce que de définir ensemble ce que c'est que la réparation. Même sur ça, on n'arrive pas à avoir une voie. C'est quoi? Parce que moi, je pense qu'on doit nous réparer d'abord, avant que les autres ne nous réparent. L'Africain s'est beaucoup fait de mal à lui-même. On s'est fait tellement de mal à nous-mêmes et on continue de se faire du mal. Un de mes meilleurs amis au Burkina Faso est en prison. et il continue de faire la lutte. Le secrétaire exécutif du Balai citoyen, il est en prison. L'autre Medcam, il est en prison. Les autres sont tués. Mais on enregistre, on ne se répare même pas de ça. On n'en parle pas. On continue, on avance, on avance, on avance. Finalement, je pense qu'on est devenu même des détraqués. C'est réparé parce que vous voyez des communautés Poole qui sont aujourd'hui agressées, tuées dans le Sahel. Mais on ne parle pas de ces meurtres en cours. Et on veut réparer des meurtres qu'on nous a poussés millénaires. Et si on arrêtait d'abord la saignée, arrêter la saignée, c'est d'abord le début de la réparation. C'est dire qu'il nous faut nous-mêmes nous entendre sur où est-ce qu'on va, si on veut devenir une vraie voix. Le deuxième point que je voulais aborder, toujours par rapport au mouvement citoyen, aujourd'hui ici, au Baraza. J'aime bien parler de ça au Baraza. Moi, je suis de Afrikki. Je sais que Boniface est là. Je sais que Hadi est là, de African Rising. Koumba Touré est là, avec tout ce qu'elle représente. Ibrahim, tous ces grands leaders-là. Vous êtes tellement beaux, quand je vous regarde ici, qu'au début, j'étais même impressionné. Il faut que vous sachiez, vous de la salle, que vous êtes en multicolore, parce qu'il y a les grilles là nous font que vous changez de couleur tout le temps et vous m'impressionnez. C'est une parenthèse. C'est la lumière. Donc, tous ces mouvements-là qui existent, nous, on organise l'Université populaire en tant qu'Afriqui. L'Université populaire de l'engagement citoyen, on va l'organiser en 2026. Est-ce que cette université sera connectée aux conclusions de cette Baraza? Depuis 2018, pratiquement ici dans cette salle, tous les activistes ici, on se connaît. On se rencontre, on se croise, on est invité à aller participer. Rouman, les artistes, les intellectuels, les activistes, même les plus jeunes qui viennent de nous rejoindre. Je veux citer quelques noms. Bon. Les plus jeunes, ils arrivent et ils arrivent aussi en perpétuant ces mêmes divisions que nous constituons déjà. Parce que chacun, dans son programme, fait le plein, fait le maximum pour être le plus visible. Et nous tous, nous venons l'aider à ce que son programme soit rayonnant. Mais est-ce que, sur 10 ans, on peut s'asseoir, nous, en tant que mouvement citoyen, et dire que voici ce que nous avions convenu de faire? Je me rappelle, à la première UPEC, on s'était levés tous, les bras levés comme ça, en disant que nous allons faire avancer l'agenda panafricain. Nous allons réaliser le rêve de Cheikh Anta Diop. Où est-ce qu'on en est? Où est-ce qu'on en est? On ne peut pas le faire parce que nous n'avons pas défini ensemble une voie où est-ce qu'on doit aller. Et je pense que c'est un point extrêmement important que le Baraza doit régler. Entre leaders de nos différents mouvements, comment on va avoir une voie? Quand je dis voie, c'est un chemin. Hein? C'est un chemin fait de tous nos chemins. Fait de tous nos chemins pour qu'au moins qu'on sache les différents événements, afin que nos différents programmes soient les instances, soit des moments, soit juste des moments d'un agenda commun et nous savons où est-ce qu'on va. Parce que si on ne le fait pas, qu'est-ce qui se passe? Si on ne le fait pas, qu'est-ce qui se passe? Eh bien, au Sénégal, je donne l'exemple du Sénégal que je connais le mieux, on a fait du Y'en a marre. À l'époque, c'était des jeunes artistes. Rouman est là, il peut vous en parler, ou Surtige. Mais voilà, on a fait un travail remarquable pour changer un président. Ensuite, nos amis du Burkina Faso ont fait un travail mais extraordinaire pour enlever Blaise Compaoré presque combien des décennies au pouvoir. Les Congolais, ils ont arrivé à pousser quand même Joseph Kabila. Je vois ici des jeunes de la Lucha. Etc., etc. Ina, il est là. Emmanuel, depuis combien de temps ils sont au Tchad en train de pousser. Je vois tous ces efforts qui sont fournis par tous ces jeunes qui ont rêvé d'un monde meilleur. Mais regardez-moi, je n'ai plus d'espoir. C'est terrible ce qui nous arrive. Il ne se passe rien sinon que c'est des populistes ou des putschistes qui prennent le pouvoir et continuent de nous écraser et on va venir ici au Baraza le pleurer. Parce que nous n'avons pas de voix. Quand je dis voix, nous ne sommes pas une opinion publique. Nous ne constituons pas une opinion publique en Afrique où les jeunes peuvent se référer. Nous avons soulevé la souveraineté en tant qu'activistes et mouvements citoyens au début de Y'en a marre. Nous avons soulevé le panafricanisme. Qu'est-ce qu'on a fait de ce panafricanisme? Sinon servir des populistes ou servir des putschistes. Mais un panafricanisme qui construit, un panafricanisme qui pousse et qui repousse, qui épanouit les Africains, où est-ce qu'on en a? Mais qui le porte sur le continent? Nous portons seulement nos gloires et nos victoires en tant qu'activistes, parce que chacun veut montrer qu'il était le plus guerrier, qu'il était le plus courageux. Où sont les idées courageuses qu'on doit montrer aux jeunes pour que ces jeunes suivent cette voie-là? Je pense qu'à un moment, il faut que nous nous arrêtons tous pour nous dire que se rendre compte de la gravité de ce qui nous arrive en tant que peuple, en tant que communauté noire. Parce que c'est ça qui m'intéresse. Moi, je dis au départ de mon propos, le Sénégal, pour moi, c'est une entité non viable parce que c'est une entité coloniale. Mais en tant que communauté noire, notre capacité à nous mettre ensemble, notre capacité à réagir à ce qui nous arrive, notre capacité à faire corps, à faire machine, à dire que nous allons vers là-bas, sur un horizon déterminé, même si c'est 1 an, qu'on essaie de marcher, qu'on fasse chemin ensemble, on n'y arrive pas, les amis. On n'y arrive pas. Et j'ai l'impression que si on continue ça, là, comme on le fait, on se retrouve, on fête nos idées. Mais on ne fête pas la réalité de nos victoires parce que nos victoires sont captées par des gens qui ont des voix et qui ont des agendas, parce qu'ils constituent finalement des opinions, parce qu'ils s'organisent en politique et ils prennent le pouvoir. Nous, qu'est-ce qu'on fait? C'est pour ça, d'ailleurs, ces années-ci, tout mon combat, c'est de dire aux jeunesses africaines d'aller en politique, mais pas n'importe comment. Parce que si c'est pour aller gonfler les rangs des partis politiques classiques que nous trouvons sur place, ça ne sert à rien. Mais il nous faut une vraie révolution au niveau d'abord des mentalités, des imaginaires, de la représentation. Qu'est-ce que c'est que politique? Il nous faut d'abord faire ce travail-là, ici, révolutionnaire d'abord, de grands changements, en nous dotant nous-mêmes d'idées, de concepts purement africains, comme le djam que nous essayons de vendre au Sénégal, qui n'est pas loin du Ubuntu, qui se réfère au maths depuis l'Égypte antique, ce que les sens au Burkina Faso aussi a pris. Comment on peut, à partir de ce moment-là, nous définir d'abord et ensuite en faire une solution, en faire une voie, en faire une opinion. Mais cela doit commencer à ce qu'on s'asseye en tant que différents acteurs, différents mouvements, différents leaders, différents networks que nous constituons, pour dire que désormais on va se réseauter. Mais pour aller où? C'est cela que nous devons définir ensemble. J'ai été long, hein? Sorry. My English is too bad, but I think you understand what I want to mean.
Thanks.
I will try it in English next time.
Okay, thank you. Phumi, just to build on what he was saying around, the very populists. So you find the shift, it was this leader and it's a populist move. And just reflecting on what you'd said earlier, but also what the other panelists have raised, what are some of the things you would, share with us around, because we find a shift, like populist, this person is popular, everyone runs, this person is standing for this, and everyone runs towards it. So what would you think?
Thank you, Ikal. And really powerful challenges raised to all of us by fellow comrades here. The first thing I want to speak to is really the question of reparations. And in the context of everything that's been sucked and taken out of the continent and how it has left the devastation. And often I feel like it's something because of our government stances that we have distanced ourselves from as movements. And I'll speak particularly on in Southern Africa, where my sense is this topic doesn't take an important role as it does maybe in West Africa, for example. It's something we need to interrogate as to why that is the issue. But it's an important thing if we are going to address the 1%, if we are going to address the illicit flow of capital out of this, if we are going to address the material conditions of the majority of the people that we live around and with. The second thinking is, I hear your pain, my comrade. I think we do not have the luxury to lose hope. And I think the system is deliberately wanting us to lose hope and not think that this epoch, this end of this cycle, is also an opportunity to hold the mirror to ourselves in as much as we hold the mirror to the systems of oppression that continues. We cannot afford to lose hope, comrades. We cannot avoid to only think about putting a representative panel in front of the stage and think that that is the way in which politics and responses to movement work requires. It requires us to question what is our emancipatory, liberatory project. It is not about policy reform. It is returning to a liberation agenda that democracies stole from us. When we say democracies are not working for us, it's because we abandoned a liberation agenda. And this is what this moment requires us to return to. What was that liberation agenda? The other thing I think that's important for me is faith, belief. Faith and belief systems are so important for all of us in this room and for all of our people. So when you see a particular right evangelist agenda being imposed across the continent to say, this is what you must believe in, this is who you must blame for why the class conditions are like this, it's a problem for us. We need to return to what is emancipatory theology. As people praise their Allah, as people praise their gods, as people praise Buddha, and so on. Because what we have come to lose is another imposition because of the conditions in which that poverty rising, that tells you blame this one because of why you are poor, because of your work conditions, because of your precarity. And it is our role as movements, as we hold the mirror to ourselves in as much as we hold the mirror to the systems of oppression, to rethink about this epoch requires us not just to think about my agenda and my struggle, because we have seen the interconnected nature of how the systems operate. It is a moment that requires us truly to think about, as I said earlier on, how is the bigger we going to look like? What are the principles and values that are going to lead this new era of us organizing and thinking about what we cook? Unfortunately, as far as I could see, the program is also designed to at least begin, instilling some of this thinking that is going to be a task for us when we leave our beautiful Accra. But it is also going to be a long, long, long way in thinking about what's the 100 years gonna look like. It's not going to be a 3-year funding proposal. It is a revolutionary agenda that we need to be thinking about that's going to take us beyond our lifetime even. So it's an invitation. At the same time, it is a challenge to really think about that it requires us to unlearn a lot of the way in which we've been doing work, movement work. It's a time for us to not hold on to the things that we've been doing. And maybe it's a time to reimagine a completely new way of thinking about what is movement work and how is that power of movement going to be built.
All right. I'll take it to Kim, because you mentioned around reparations. So if you could sort of thinking through some of the reflections that have been mentioned by colleagues.
Sure. Repeat after me. I know I can be what I want to be. If I work hard at it, I'll go where I want to be. I know I can be what I want to be. If I work hard at it, I'll go where I want to be. Listen, boys and girls, we have everything we need. The first reparation starts with us repairing and living in our healed state. Our abundant future is now. It's not this place we're going to. Look at how far we've come. I am my ancestors' wildest dreams. We're here in Ghana, the Gold Coast, where they took us as human cargo, the greatest crime against humanity. And I have the privilege to bring my ancestors into this room and sit on this stage next to you fine people. You know that you are from South Africa and you are Zulu or you speak of the Ubuntu. You have access to your indigenous languages. It's a privilege for me to even be invited into this space. We made it. And I think so difficult for us to imagine what we want the world to be like. And I'll tell you, my Francophone brother from Senegal, he said, what are we supposed to tell the young people following us? That is our job. And my job is not to keep them laser focused on unpacking the problem. My job is not to train them up to be human rights attorneys, to go into the Hague and help them understand how to legally use this system that is both jury, judge, and executioner to help them determine that, yes, reparations is necessary. So you practice now so that you can take over this microphone when I can no longer speak. My job is to say, listen, I got this. While you have time, focus on our abundant future. Design it now. Start practicing healthy relationship development. Practice building trust with people that speak different languages from you but are on the same team. Practice building allyship. We need to go back to the basics. We're so busy trying to figure out what other actors outside of us owe us that we have forgotten the basics. What are the reparations that we owe ourselves? We owe it to ourselves to heal, to build healthy relationships, to build in coalition, to practice working, and to see from our worldview, because we need practice with that too. We use Eurocentric paradigms birthed out of this scarcity sense of being, but we have abundance. And because we've been culturally derailed, because we didn't get a chance to see what the mamas in the marketplace with the susus and what that would eventually become as an economic system, we didn't get a chance to see what that development would look like. We didn't get a chance to see what the Gyekye out of Rwanda, what that healing and restorative justice practice in Rwanda, what that would look like in real practice. When we think about Mbongi out of Congo, we need to see what our worldview looks like in practice in real time, and we need time to do that. So we have been culturally derailed, and it's time for us to realign our focus. That's what real reparations is. So I could tell you, let me promote, May 24th, 25th, and 26th, we're going to be at the Vatican in Rome, having conversations with them, because the Vatican is a government. The canon law, it's a city within Rome, and they're one of the richest cities in the world because they've been able to benefit from our oppression and colonization. So I could tell you, yes, pack your bags, get ready to meet me in Rome. Let's go and unpack these religious institutions that have benefited from us, the insurance companies that insured the ship Jesus, right, that took my ancestors across the water. They still exist. These entities haven't gone away. These seeds have grown. But what I want to tell you, right, while I do that work, spend your time talking to your young people, doing the work of planting seeds of our abundant future. Because I tell you, we will get our reparations. The coming. These systems will implode. They will destroy themselves. Self-destruction is what happens. We've seen the rise and decline of many civilizations. When we read our history, we know that we don't need to give them any assistance. What COVID-19 showed us in 2020, all we have to do is not participate. And these systems start to close down one after the other. One after the other. I think my mic. Get to it. Spirit saying, calm down. Calm down. Extreme. Be all I want to be. And listen, our focus has to be on us, because what we learned during COVID is that the renegotiation was in our consciousness. We realized, I'm not dying to go into this job and get these people money. I actually enjoy spending time with my family. I forgot what that felt like. We need more of that. We need to remember what it's like to be with us in safe spaces. And it's something special about knowing that somebody's got your back when you don't have to constantly live in fear and look over your shoulder. Our organization, the Teaching Artists Institute, we work with young people. We especially work with African and indigenous young people. One year we brought a group of them to Bagamoyo, Tanzania for our Summer Learning Institute. And I'll make sure I make it quick. One of the young men, he was from Brooklyn, New York. Brooklyn, New York, if you don't know New York, let me tell you, it's the city that never sleeps. The lights never go off. And he said, Kim, we're walking from our university campus to our hotel and it's pitch black. I can't see my hand in front of my face, and I have never felt more safe. I live in Brooklyn where the lights never go off, and I can't stop looking over my shoulder because I feel like at any moment I might be attacked. Listen, we need to spend more time with each other, feeling safe. Our young people don't feel safe. How can they imagine the future when they're in a constant sense of fight or flight, pupils dilated, palms sweaty? They can't stop looking over their shoulders. We need to create liberated zones. That is what reparations looks like for us. Yes, some of us have to go to the Vatican. Some of us need to call these people out, and there needs to be a consistent flow of communication to help them understand their inadequacy. But the majority of us have to be focused on these liberated zones because we have to invest in our future now. And if all of us, if the best of us are focused on how we unpack legally what happened to us, the greatest crime against humanity, if the best of us are trying to attack and tear down this system with the master's tools, we have forgotten the rest of us, the babies behind us. And that is the real reparations that I seek with the Teaching Artists Institute, and I hope to bring that into this space today and hold it up.
Thank you, Kim. So to Barzini, your thoughts.
Yeah, well, my voice is loud enough as it is, and thank you very much. I really wish I could be what I want to be, which is 1 meter taller and 96,000 kilograms lighter, but but I think you're perfectly right in terms of. Well, no, it definitely is not coming from me. Thank you for the reassurance. I think your point, though, about looking to ourselves goes to the heart of goes to the core of what Briggs was talking about in terms of building our power. I think others have spoken about the same things. And in so doing, I think, the element of the subjective as individual is not necessarily the best starting point for it. So, for example, you've said wonderful things and absolutely legitimate things about the people that we might leave behind, our children, planting seeds for the future, and so on and so forth. But the point that I was making earlier about the internal and the external of the system where we are, in terms of the global and the local, it's important to bear that in mind. If you're in the DRC today, and your perspective is that imperialism is alive in the world, yes, it is alive. Only a few days ago, Donald Trump is making a deal to seize, take control of natural resources in DRC. This is a pure mafia operation. It's a protection racket. That's what the mafia do. I give you protection, you pay me. But at the same time, can we forget the role of the M23 and Rwanda? Okay? Because here you are in a situation where, let's understand this very clearly. Part of the trigger for the current wave of violence in the DRC is the fact that Rwanda also feared that it was losing, relatively speaking, losing ground to other interests who are also African interests. When Rwanda's control over critical minerals such as cobalt and so on and so forth, that's gone unchallenged. But we all know that in terms of the global market, critical minerals such as cobalt, the prices are going down. In the era of instability, so very well contextualized by Briggs, gold is rising because of its, And the gold market in DRC has been increasingly encroached upon from a Rwandan point of view by Uganda, by Burundi, even by Central African Republic in its own crisis, as well as the fact that it is given elements in Kinshasa and other parts of the DRC itself other leeway. In fact, that is why Tshisekedi feels that it is a good time to start negotiating with the United States. Now, in that circumstance, do we simply say that, and Rwanda's mechanisms for doing so are just as identical, in terms of form at least, in terms of aspiration, to what bigger powers do? When Rwanda goes into Cabo Delgado in Mozambique, it doesn't simply go as a fighting force to prove that in the geopolitical military sense, it can match and rival, perhaps even outperform South Africa as a reliable vector for global interests in terms of ENI and all the energy contracts there. It goes there also with its own companies. Crystal Ventures, for example. It is a big holding company for the Rwanda government and all its subsidiaries. I mean, there's a whole infrastructure of economic development and so on that is taking place in terms of Rwandan companies and so on and so forth. It's important that we bear in mind that the economics matter. The political economy matters. And the political economy is one of surplus extraction from ordinary people and the natural resources and the natural environment on which their livelihoods depend and on whom the kind of, relationship that you're describing has been forged over centuries. If I sit here in Ghana and simply say reparations, I'm an Akan, ethnically speaking. My group is called Akan. Not that it means that much to me, but it's my language and so on and so forth. No, But how can I forget that in my ethnic community, the most powerful kingdoms were born precisely out of the slave trade. So the most powerful chief, royal traditional ruler in Ghana today, the Ashanti king, and many of us would have learned, Ashanti resistance to Britain and so on. It was a slave kingdom. Okay? And therefore, in reparations, what should that Ashanti chief pay? And all the big chiefs in Ghana and so on and so forth. And I would insist that they do. Okay? So the fact is that for us to say, look at ourselves, that notion of our political independence, which ought to be separate from the interests of our national government, such as the Rwandese, ought to be separate from the traditional rulers, such as the Asante Hene, the king of Asante. And we find that in the same way you take a place like South Africa, you find that chiefs and custom and tradition is being re-empowered for neoliberal purposes, not simply to celebrate custom and culture and all that kind of thing. And for that reason, the reference point that Briggs made to culture, there's another dimension to it. Because the culture that Cabral was seeking to be an emancipatory, liberatory culture is one that also looks at the material location of the different subgroups that make up the culture. So, for example, if you are in, say, a pastoralist community, in an economy that from colonialism onwards has been structured as a raw material exporting community, and in your zone, there's no raw materials to export. Obviously, your marginalization comes from the fact that you are incidental, relatively speaking, to the main ways of making money. For that same reason, you are the obvious target when it comes to building wind farms and seizing land and all the kinds of climate, so on and so forth, because there's no value else that you are producing other than what we can extract from your inability and your exclusion from, basically productively building a productive and viable relationship with your own natural environment and so on. So, comrades, the question of democracy is not simply a question of vote and so on and so forth. Democracy was always a class question. Always a class question. That is why kings' heads were cut in Europe before and the rising middle class then, what is now the ruling class of the globe, took power. For us too, it ought to mean that we are taking command of natural resources, of land, on the basis of radical equality of everybody, whatever your gender, whatever your ethnicity, whichever part of the country you come from. Nobody can have an indigenous right. So if we talk about gold and the price going up, does that mean that, and we say we want community control? Well, fine. So the gold producing areas, they have community control, assuming that they do. What happens to the communities that don't have gold? Are they to be left behind too? So the fact of the kind of redistributive ethos that allows us to harmonize the variety of different interests and promote the things that we can usefully produce and exchange and plan for each other. That ascendancy of use values over extra surplus value and so on and so forth. In other words, a radically different way of organizing economy, society, agriculture, industry, and so on and so forth, without making any concession to the idea that somehow production, is the problem. Because productivism refers to only one type of production. The type of production which does not care about the external cost of despoiling the environment, destroying people's lives, and so on and so forth. When we are talking about the way in which we thrive in our own communities, husbanding our natural resources, our water systems, governing it from the basis of our collective decision-making, building people's parliaments, assemblies, new institutions of power and consultation around them. We are talking about radical different things. And that one, it does require production. Because I do not see how, given the centuries of abuse and degradation, I do not see how a woman working, scratching the ground with a hoe, the dry, arid ground with a hoe for 500, and we simply celebrate the majority of women are in food farming. They produce the majority of food. So they should stay in that condition, or what? Apart from the fact that that type of technology and that type of production can never feed us. So we need to rise up to scale. And that's what I love most about Briggs's point. he started from the point of view that we're facing a global system. And that global system requires that how we repair our individuality. How do we repair our various subjectivities in terms of our community? And here, I must warn, in my view, that I think we need to transcend the idea of community as territorial, or as kin, or as ethnic. The communities that we need are the communities that working people, those who produce the surplus, are taking over on the basis of their collective power, and doing so and able, therefore, to network with people and being wide open to embrace anybody on the same equal rights as women, whatever, wherever you come from, you are allowed, you are welcome, and we build on that basis. And that is the only way to assure ourselves of the fact that on a day-to-day basis, we can fight for those who are looking for water, we can fight for those pastoralists who are demanding that the natural resources not be taken over by wind farms and so on and so forth. We can fight for those who are standing up against ethnicity and so on. And at the same time, link it to the questions of the redistributive justice element that makes sense to everybody and can provide a unifying agenda around the questions of reparations and redistribution. Because otherwise, identity politics is the bane that we are going to keep continuing to face. Today, it is LGBT. Tomorrow, and that's even the best of identity politics, because that's identity politics in resistance. Yet, it is a system that is, all-encompassing. The fact that you are LGBT does not mean you don't need food to eat, or that you don't need a job, or that you don't need education or clean water. You need all of those things. And in our context, let's also understand that it is not just natural resources. Our economies, in terms of deindustrialization, has taken place, which means that the most important concentrated resources that we have in our economies outside of the natural resource sector is the service sector. Big infrastructure tickets, and that's why you can have economies grow to the roof through massive infrastructure. Those infrastructure deals become sources of profit, and the country ends up in debt. Okay? So the service industry, the privatization of utilities, the privatization of energy services, infrastructure services, water, so on and so forth. These are things that unite consumer and producer alike. They unite rural and urban alike. They unite formal and informal alike. They unite man or woman, whatever it is. And those are the things that we ought to understand, that their reorganization, their democratic, popular control are the basis, the bedrock, the seeds of the future that we need. But that future is not tomorrow. That future starts right now. And that's what we have to do. Ultimately, there's the question of politics and the state. Because, Fadel, the other thing too is this. You see, if we fight, the only reason why somebody else can appropriate the gains of our fight is that our agenda did not include taking over political power. We fight so that somebody will replace somebody. So, and therefore, we might have a better deal. But the fact is that if you're thinking about it from the point of view of seizing back control of land, of water, of ensuring that there's a new regime of public investment such that it can't be going to pay debts and so on and so forth, okay, and so on and so forth. That is change, that you have a constitutional review issue, and the first thing that might happen in that constitutional review is the radical equality of all people and in terms of their incremental control. That is the political agenda, because you cannot do that without having some institutions that harmonize our collective interest. You cannot do that without some notion of the state. Okay, and that notion of the state, even if it starts off by challenging the state that we have, does not deny that some collective levels of collective public institutions are necessary. Without that, you get the free-for-all and the chaos and all that. And I'm saying that when we say we want our political independence, it ought to include how do we take power for our class? How do we take power for our people in terms of their farmers and so on and so forth? So all the traditions that we have had that have sought to go beyond identities and try to organize on the basis of political encroachment, pushing back, altering the balance of forces in society, such that we use that as the basis for taking power. I think that's where we ought to go as well. Thank you very much.
All right. So back to you. Through the next 3 days, you think through some of the sentiments made here, the comments, and some of the things the contradictions that you've all been dealing with. I'd like to thank my panelists for a very engaging conversation, and I hope you can keep in touch.